very warm welcome to the FOOTWORX Podcast. Today we're discussing a topic that sits right at the heart of private practice in the UK, the self-employed associate model. For decades, this has been the dominant way that clinics operate. Podiatrists often work as self-employed associates on fee share basis, commonly around a 50-50 split. It's a structure that many of us have come to see as normal and even expected when entering private practice, but the regulatory landscape is changing. Following a recent webinar hosted by the Royal College of Podiatry Southwest branch titled Being on the Right Side of HMRC with IR35 for Clinic Owners and Associates, many clinic owners are beginning to ask the uncomfortable question: is the traditional associate model still legally workable in 2026? But more importantly, if it isn't, what should replace it? Rather than looking for loopholes or ways around employment law, perhaps the real opportunity for our profession is to ask, how do we build a modern podiatry business with an employment model that both works for both practitioners and clinic owners? I'm joined by Erica Nicholls, the chair of the Royal College of Podiatry Southwest branch, who recently hosted that webinar. Welcome.
Hi, Damian. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Erica. I have been a podiatrist since 2017. I started off as a Woolworths girl, and then I graduated to ASDA next and focused DIY, which is where I finished before breaking my ankle, which was the end of one chapter, and I never knew it was going to be the beginning of this one. I run my own little business. It's just me at the moment, down in sunny, very wet, damp and stormy Devon at the present moment in time. I previously worked for a clinic, but I was employed, and then I broke away, and I've been, my own business now for 3.5 years.
Enjoy it?
I love my little business, and I've built it up bit by bit. I do a mixture of clinic and home visit. So I have been the chair of the Devon branch of the Royal College of Podiatry. And then that it started off as the treasury, then the secretary, and then the chair. And then we've progressed to merging the region into one. And I've been the chair for the Southwest for now nearly 2 years. So I run lots of CPD events. That's something I'm quite passionate about, is putting on as much variety and as much CPD for our members. And we open it up to everybody else. So it's not just the Royal College that we allow in our events.
This particular webinar, being on the right side of HMRC and IR35 for clinic owners and associates. For those that didn't see the webinars, there were some real key takeaway messages. In particular, it was that he went through the HMRC CEST online tool. What did you think about the outcome of that when he went through that model?
But it's all about the CEST tool, obviously, is what HMRC use as their basis of your status. And it's something that you do as an associate to ensure that you are tax status correct, because CEST stands for checking your employment status for tax, basically. And you work through it, your questions, you answer them as truthfully as you can to your usual working practice. And the outcome will be either you are employed or undetermined. They will try and get you to not realize what you're answering, maybe answer incorrectly. And some of the questions like high value tools, which was quite interesting, because to them, high value, if you're earning 50 grand, high value tools is 10 grand plus.
Yeah.
And then why would you be buying something like that if you are self-employed in another clinic?
Yeah, I picked up on that as well, the high value, because we see it discussed on forums. A lot of the topics that come out onto this podcast originate from discussions on forums that I can see is gaining momentum, and people are a little bit unsure, confused, and want reassurance. And there's a lot of people that are saying, if you provide your own instrumentation to treat, say, routine care, this constitutes as providing your own equipment. That listening to David on the podcast, that's quite far from the truth, which I think is quite an eye-opener. The only thing that I could think that came close to that, because it was proportionate to how much you could do in a year, wasn't it? And he was talking in the sort of high thousands, tens of thousands, were those that, maybe doing remote ultrasonography or these sort of things, which is probably quite few and far between. So that particular question, that tool, then immediately just went into the, you're not an associate, you are actually an employee. I think my takeaway from it was that when he went through the tool, and yes, you're quite right, HMRC have basically built it full of tripwires all the way through, that ultimately, without the potential of replacing yourself, which we'll talk about in a minute, in the eyes of HMRC, you're an employee in, I would say, probably 80% of podiatry businesses, if not higher than that. There isn't really a way around it. He did touch upon so what was it called? You could swap yourself out, couldn't you?
To substitution.
The right to substitution, that's correct. Yeah. He talked about that as potentially the only way now under the current guidance of the HMRC that may see you as an associate and not an employee. What was your thoughts around that?
There was so much information about, I've always wondered about the hours and if you're working regularly, but with the right to substitution, you have to have a contract basically as an associate with the client or clinic that you are going to work for. And obviously in there, you need to put the right substitution. So if you are sick, if you are not able to attend a clinic, then you have the right to send somebody else in your behalf. Which I did find a bit weird because obviously if you are self-employed, you wouldn't necessarily have somebody on hand to, oh, by the way, I'm really poorly. Can you go in and work in this clinic for me on my behalf? Because if you were employed, you wouldn't have that either. Somebody to go in because you're sick to cover your shift for your book. Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't have anybody to actually be a substitute.
There's a lack of podiatrists for a start. If the clinic owner for whom you're providing services to was to be to accept and have that in a contract that you could substitute yourself out if you weren't available, then that would constitute essentially you working on a self-employed basis in that clinic. It seems like a loophole at the moment. My concern with loopholes in anything to do with HMRC would be that if many people exploited it for any period of time, they would close it down. It's a bit like people trying to dodge taxes. As soon as they find the next scheme, they close it down. Yeah. So my concern would be that if there's a profession trying to utilize that essential loophole at the moment, it wouldn't be long until it's a short-lived way forward with the profession. I suppose thinking about it, because I've given it some thoughts since the webinar, if there were a pool of podiatrists, say you had half a dozen clinics and half a dozen podiatrists, and there was a pool of which they mixed between those clinics, and there was an agreement between the clinics and between the pool of podiatrists, that could work well in a sort of a regional way. And I think essentially that would provide sort of some continuity to patients seeing certain types of staff that they would have seen before because they'd be pulled there. I suppose a little bit like the NHS would do with providing services within a region. They'll have so many staff and they'll cover so many different clinics and they'll rotate. Have to be done, but who's going to manage that and who's going to run that and what sort of, how are you going to actually do it? It's very complex.
Yeah. And you have to do a CEST tool assessment for every clinic you work in.
Yeah.
You can't even just do it for just the one and assume it one shoe fits all. You have to have the 3 CEST tools and print it off to show your status within that clinic.
Clinic owners would also have to have the contracts in place that would allow for this sort of substitution. Me speaking from a personal perspective, I couldn't possibly have somebody substitute at a short notice in my clinic for somebody that wasn't, we employ in our clinics, that wasn't employed by, because I wouldn't know who I was working with, you wouldn't be able to follow the ways that we treat our clinic guidelines, our standards, and ultimately, and the most important thing, I think the patient wouldn't accept it anyway.
And there was no time limit on it either.
No.
So there was no stipulated, your right to substitution. You could get somebody else to go in and do the work on your behalf, but there was no time limit on how long that person could be then going in to work on your behalf. So that's a loophole, but it's also a bit of how does that work with time frame wise, as you said, because then at some point the clinic owner is going to go, well, hang on a minute, yeah, are you coming back?
This obviously works to a certain degree, because if we're accessing public services, most public services we don't pay for under with healthcare under the NHS. So if you will go to your doctor, you will have your preference on the doctor or nurse that you see. But ultimately, if you're sick and you need to see somebody, you will accept whoever's available to see you. I think to a certain degree, dentistry is the same, ophthalmology is the same in this respect. So substitution probably works better in these professions than it does in podiatry and the patients. And ultimately, it's their care that we're dealing with. So we should really be providing the right service for them.
I'm always being asked by my patients, are you ever going to take anybody on? You're always busy. And I've said, oh, maybe later in the year, maybe later in the year. And the first thing they always say is, but I'll be staying with you.
But yeah.
And it's true. A lot of people prefer the person that they build a rapport with. That is your connection with that patient, is you build that rapport. They trust you and what you do. They like what you do. And yeah, substituting somebody else can be a temporary measure because you're sick or you're on holiday. They want that person that they prefer to see the most.
Absolutely. In my clinic, we have 6 practitioners. I'm one of them. And of course, it was my practice. Where historically, people will still want to see me, even though in many aspects, I'm not the best practitioner for them, because the people that I've got working around me have different specialities. But yes, patient, the continuity of care, they certainly do. And what we try to do in our practice is we have this phrase that I use all the time, which is every patient, every time, which basically means that we treat every patient in the same way every time. And then what I say to the patients with those awkward moments that you do get is that we try and work in a way that, although we like to try and keep continuity of care, we train our staff so that the care that we provide is identical with every patient every time. It's a good ethos, it's a good target to try and reach all the time. But in reality, there are huge differences between us all. We all try and strive to do the same thing. But I think the bigger practices get, the more that becomes a challenge. So I want to unpack now the pros and cons from both the practice owner and the associate's point of view as to why we want to keep this associate model. I made a bit of a list because I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to remember all of these, but ultimately, the practice owner, I'm going to pay NI, no pension, no holiday, no sick pay. I'm going to pay for payroll management. There's less employment law, less employment obligations. It's easier to bring people on for more sessions and let them go when it's quieter, so the flexibility is there. And you don't have to pay redundancy, and it's an easier way to recruit people.
But you're also not paying out on CPD. You're not paying out on any further training for them. You're not paying out on anything that you would do if you employed someone. As a clinic owner, as a practice owner, you're more quids in with your business. It's more money in your pocket. And yeah, I can understand why. And I did work in a business that did employ associates. So I can understand from that perspective why a lot of people, because it's a headache when you start looking into laws, HR and everything else. It's actually quite a minefield, which I have started looking at slightly, but it is it's a lot to take in if you are just setting out not just setting out as a business, but setting out as someone who's looking to take on another member of staff.
I'm not going to go into the political side of things at the moment, but there has been a change in employment law, which then is worrying people with regards to the fact that no probationary periods is scaring people. Obviously, the higher cost of employing people. This is very political. The government are not doing us any favors. They really aren't. When I went through that list, one thing just screamed out to me, and I'm looking at it at the moment from the employer's point of view, or the practice owners, I should say. It's flexibility. I think it's more flexibility than financial, because when you see people saying, I'm quite happy to take an associate on a 50-50 model, and that's, I'm not going to get into it, but that screams bad business from the minute that somebody says that. But they're happy to do it because they're looking for the flexibility. They don't want to run a complicated organization, so you can understand that. And I think the same is true from the associate position, really. They're looking for flexibility. They may not want to be tied to one practice. They may only want to be able to pick and choose the hours they work. They may want to work in multiple different clinics to vary their working week. They also want the flexibility that goes with that practice owner associate model. And I think that's why it's worked so well. Yes, the financial side, when people see business owners looking at 50-50, 60-40 models, that's for another podcast. I've already put a lot of stuff out on how that doesn't work financially. I'm not going to label that yet. So that's a bad model for anybody that's taking on member staff, should we say. But probably a good model for the associates. So financially, it's better for them as well. However, looking on the other side of it, there's no security in that.
It's almost like having a zero contract in normal services, retail and everything like that. You can have weeks where you've got 24 hours, you've got weeks where you can have 30 hours. Then there's weeks when you really need the money and you're not even getting any hours because actually it's a quiet period for the business and they don't need you. So yeah, for me, you do have, business has the right to go, I'm giving you notice. I'm no longer going to need you to come in. And
yeah, that concerns me because although it seems financially the better option and the flexibility option, which I totally agree with, I'm not opposed to these at all, but there is no security for both the business owner and the associates. In my practice in 24 years, I've run longer on a business owner and associate model than I have on an employment model. But yeah, the lack of security is huge. And I know that there have been business owners and associates working in harmony for donkey's years, and this is only upsetting what has been a very nice status quo in a lot of clinics. But there are other scenarios where you've got that sort of boom and bust of clinics and associates starting and finishing. And that's very disruptive, I think, both the clinic owner, the associate, and ultimately the patient who haven't got continuity of care. You can almost understand why people are trying to grab on by their fingernails to the whole system. And I can understand why. When I pay my tax contributions to my staff, it's eye-watering, and anybody that pays these contributions just wishes it was going to the staff and not to the government. But that's not the case. You can't run a business in the UK legally unless you run it that way. Ultimately, I think we've got to accept that we are, whether we like it or not, moving towards the employer-employee relationship that I embraced some years ago. And you know what? It's not that bad. I wanted this podcast to be positive. I contacted you because I could see, and sometimes online you were getting a little bit of negative comments directed at you by trying to highlight this, and it was coming from a good place, and I could understand where you were coming from. And I contacted you and said, Erica, would you come on to the podcast? Because I feel like you're getting bad press sometimes by trying to bring what is essentially a modern era into private practice.
yeah, I've had it with a few CPD things where I've been called a bully and I'm scaring people and things like that. However, sometimes you do have to think, we don't just work and we can work and do whatever we want. We sign up to the HCPC, we sign up to the Royal College, and we agree to standards and we agree to do things correctly. The same with doing your basic life support, doing your emergency first aid at work. Everything we do, we have to do correctly because there's somebody behind us with a checklist and a clipboard going, have they done this? Have they done it for a reputable company? Are they doing things correctly? Because the worst thing would be doing it just wrong once and being put out of business.
Yeah.
And something you've built up and worked hard on. Yeah, sometimes people don't like maybe my abrupt way or my direct point of saying things. However, it's only in their best interest because at the end of the day, none of us want to hear that we're doing something wrong and that actually we should be doing it a completely different way.
And all credit to you for doing that, because we're all far more enriched. I learned a lot going on that webinar. And it's something that I felt that I knew a lot about, and all credit to you. And that's why I wanted to bring you on the show, because I don't think that you're a bully or abrupt, but you're quite right. Nobody wants to hear that they're doing something wrong or they're doing it the wrong way. And that includes myself. Our natural disposition is to, is to become defensive about it, isn't it? We don't want to hear that, even if it's the truth. And so for those people that want to criticize us for that, let them criticize it if we're trying to push the profession forward. I think we are in an amazing position as podiatrists. I feel very lucky by going into the profession that I chose. It has given me so much so far, and I only wish I was younger, because I do think that the future of podiatry has the potential of being amazing. I'm almost quite envious of my younger colleagues as to where the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to go. And if the stumbling block just happens to be the employment arrangement, that's not a stumbling block. I think that we're into a fork in the road, really, whereby those business owners have got a choice. And those new practitioners that are coming into the profession have got a choice. You either stay as you are, which means that you've got to shrink, which means that you can't employ people. You can't put them on associates the way that you have done. If you do, you're running a gauntlet. So you're going to shrink and fail and ultimately die. But those that really want to have a future in private podiatry, I think we have to embrace this employer-employee relationship. And I think the pros and cons of that, I think there are far more pros than cons, because if you look at the reason why people will want to stay as an associate, which is the flexibility and the money.
Yep.
Then what you gain with that, you lose with not being able to have a future, a salary that you can rely on, a place at work that you're proud to work in or run if you're the practice owner, building your profession.
The thing is, though,
survival
of the fittest are those that are willing to adjust and adapt with the going times in order to survive and succeed. And if you want your business and company to survive, you have to be willing to adjust and adapt. You've got to be willing to embrace new treatments. You've got to be willing to try new things. You've got to be willing and open to changing models that worked 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. But life and everything else moves so quickly these days that what was in play 10 years ago probably really wouldn't fit now, because our working ways are different, employment laws are different, what the government dictates is slightly different. And going from an associate clinic model to an employee, it also comes down to, do you want a team that works with you, or do you just want people working for you? I think it comes down to how you view what you want and where you want your business to go and grow and be in 5 years and 10 years. So I think you've got to decide which way is best. But going forward, employer-employee works both ways far better than the associate model.
The new grads that are coming through, they see the profession absolutely different to me, because they see it for what it is now. They're seeing fantastic practices up and down the country, more and more emerging. I get very excited when I see these progressive practices emerging, and they aspire to running practices like that of their own, or certainly working in practices like that. And that only really comes with practices that are running consistent clinical standards. They're investing in CPD education, not only for themselves as clinic owners, but for their staff. They're charging the right prices so that they can pay the right salaries. They're building a culture really built on professional care, professional standards, fun, and working.
Building trust in the community, because the more that somebody likes what you do in your clinic and your business, the more people they tell. And then those that went to other clinics that are maybe 20 miles down the road will maybe change their mind and come to you, because actually their friends have gone there and They like the atmosphere and the reception staff are lovely. And the patient is the person you are impressing.
Yeah.
I see it, because they're either going to love you and tell everybody, or they're going to hate you and tell everybody. And that is the culture these days.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Jeff Bezos, he's famous for building Amazon. Because he's so customer focused. He focuses on what the customer wants, and that's how he built his empire. And I think if we look at what the patient is looking for in modern times, what they're looking for is a place to go to for foot care that's outside of the NHS, that they trust, that they rely upon, and that ultimately provides the level of care that they need. Now, we could all think of practices in our locality that really are promoting podiatry, the profession of podiatry. They're not unicorns. We can all do that job. But ultimately, those unicorn practices, as we see them, are the ones really that are striving for that clinical excellence. And I will assure you that most of those practices that we're currently thinking of employ their staff. Because if you think of it from a patient's perspective, or a customer, if you were thinking of it along Jeff Bezos, what they want to come into is a practice where it's cohesive, they're wearing the same uniform, they're treating the patients in the same manner, they're seeing the same people, and there's a diversity of care amongst the specialities within the clinic. They feel secure in the provision that they're getting. It's high class, it's well maintained, it's well resourced, has all of those things. And that can only come from a business that is employing people correctly, training them correctly, charging correctly so they can pay for the facilities, services.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to achieve that on a business owner associate model. And this really, for us going forward as a profession, is what we should be striving towards, because podiatry has made a seismic shift in the way people perceive, the public perceive us as a profession. The way that I'm perceived now as a podiatrist compared to when I started and the work that I was doing is huge. People now pay handsomely for my time and my knowledge, to a point whereby I have to pinch myself and think, God, is this really me? And I'm so excited for podiatrists going forward, because where we were always perceived as second class other healthcare professions, like optometry, like dentistry, and like medicine, I think we're narrowing that margin. I think we're becoming far more recognized as specialists. People are going to GPs now and they're saying that you need to go and see a podiatrist. And this is about coming further and further into people's minds. They understand what the word means, they understand the profession, and it's our job then to deliver that in a professional manner. And if that means moving from an associate model to an employed model, so what? What difference does it make? Because as long as you're running it correctly, you're not looking over your shoulder, you're not stepping into holes because you're trying to find the next loophole. You're secure going to bed at night when you put your head on the pillow, that you're running things correctly, that your mantra and what you've been trying to achieve by running that.
Yeah. The thing with the associate model now, and I'm going to be a little serious now, is the fact that as a clinic, you will be hammered if the associate has misstated themselves. And, it's the hassle then. You've got to pay up what's not been paid. And then you have that right to go at your associate, to go, you now owe me £43,000 because they've backdated the tax and national insurance. And also they've added on a percentage between 35 and 100% extra on top. And as an associate, there's you thinking, oh, I'm safe and I'm getting extra fees and I'm doing this. But actually, you run the risk of losing your house or anything that you own to pay for this debt that shouldn't have even been there in the first place. Whereas as an employer-employee, your tax code is set, your employer sends off every month the information that is required, and it's done, dusted, and worked out, and nobody's in any minds as to whether or not something's wrong, something's been miscalculated. Nothing like that at all. Nobody has to employ anybody full time. You can still employ people part time. It works a lot better for people, especially, and I'm generalizing in a way, but I would probably say it's maybe what, a 60-40 split with women and men. Women are more, I see more female podiatrists around than I do male. And we are the ones that raise the children. We are the ones that have to be flexible with school time. So you can still get that flexibility as an employee, because it just means you can have 2 to 3 part-timers, but you have more of a consistent team because actually you've got 3 women who have children, but they love being part of a team and they give their all when they're in to do their 6 hours, 7 hours, or that all day, because they know that they are being valued as a person and as a profession. And going forward, that is what you're getting. And then some of them are coming from the NHS. So you're getting valuable information in regards to your diabetes and wounds assessments and everything else, and your vascular. So they bring value to your clinic, but more as an employee.
I've had the pleasure of bringing on my last 2 employees who have just brought on one very recently, have come from NHS. One's been there 2 years and one's been there 7 years, and they join my practice and they bring a huge amount of knowledge in vascular and wound care. The one particular employee has also run a part of the department in the NHS as well. So it brings in knowledge about running departments and treatment pathways and referral pathways, and all of these things is only enhancing my practice. And you're quite right. The split between ladies and gentlemen in podiatry, I think it's probably greater than that. I probably think it's probably more 70-30, but then certainly from an employer's point of view, that's how it works in my practice. And I think, conversations that we should be having, and I'm going to ask, because you're a CPT provider, that perhaps we need to be having webinars on, if this is the change that's ahead, how can we now start working together as employers to be able to look at those things that made us want to become clinic owners and associates, which really comes around flexibility and finance, and see how we can start bringing in flexibility and finance into that employer relationship. Because if that's all that's stopping us and moving forward as a profession, then there are challenges that we can overcome quite easily, because ultimately the employer is going to have all the benefits of having a cohesive team that works with them. They're going to feel far more secure. I feel far more secure in having a team that is out there working hard for the business, not just for me. And, the employee then is to the same extent, should be credited with having a position within the business of credibility, because I think you lose that as an associate. Who are you in the business? You're just a tag on that one day is here, the next day is not. So you have a professional status in the business. You've got to be well paid, suitably paid. I mean, the NHS framework gives a very good framework for private practitioners to work to and work beyond, hopefully. Training, education, life, but also you touched upon mums working part-time in the business, of which I have a few. And they'll say to me, yes, they work their hours around their childcare. It is difficult. It's difficult for everybody, particularly if they have families, but it is difficult. They may have other dependents, such as the parents to look after, etc. So we all have responsibilities. If you've got an employer that understands that and is flexible to that, and my staff that come in, the mums, for instance, they say, I like my 2 days or my 3 days here because I could be me and not always mum. And when they're me and they're in a practice and they're given professional scope of practice, they're very much part of the team. They bring a lot of knowledge, they bring a lot of expertise. Yes, they work hard and they're remunerated appropriately. Then that's an exciting place for us to be as a profession going forward, but also an exciting place for people to join the profession, which we've had difficulties in the UK. If you look at dentistry, I keep touching upon dentistry, that we do aspire to dentistry, and so we should. They don't have any shortage of applications for dental school. They're batting them away. You can't get in there. I'd love to see podiatry like that. Why? Because people know if they train as a dentist, they've got a profession that is publicly respected. they've got a profession that they know financially is good for them. It's a very aspirational career, and podiatry it is right now. And if we all pull together, that is a very exciting future, and one that I would love to see a webinar discussing how that can work and how it is working, maybe reaching out to those clinics that come to the forefront of our mind that seem to be doing that and saying, how are you guys doing it? And how can the rest of us do it? You know, perhaps that would be a brilliant webinar going forward. And you're the person to bring that to life, Erica.
I've already got ideas on things that we do need to look at, especially like employment law, which has changed, especially around maternity, paternity, especially around women in menopause. There's different things that they are bringing in, sick pay and everything else. So that's already on my radar. But there's only so many months in the year, and there's only so many weeks that we can do things. But things will get planned, and we do try. My biggest issue when it comes to CPD and podiatrists, they will book on for anything that is clinical. You put on business ones, they do not deem business CPD as important or a must to do. Now, with the HCPC, you are agreeing that you will do CPD that is relevant and will enable you and enhance your ability to do your job. So if you're running a business yourself, then yes, business CPD is much important as understanding zero, making tax digital and everything else, or making sure that you are doing all the policies that you should have to do and tick and make sure that's correct. CPD needs to change as much in the mindset that people need to realize that if you are running a business or if you are going to be self-employed, that business CPD is just as important as any clinical, because both aspects affect what you do and how you do it and whether you're doing it correctly or not. So yeah, we do try to do business ones. That is something I do.
I appreciate that, because you're quite right. If you are running a practice, you've got equal amounts of responsibility to the patients through your clinical CPD as you do to your, let's say, associates or employees, because that's where we're at the moment, that you're providing the right working environment and everything that goes with that for them. So you are quite right. It is CPD, certainly in private practice, does span both elements of the patient care and practitioner care as well. I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank you for coming on to this podcast. So where can people find you? Where can people find what you're doing?
So we have a Facebook page. So the Royal College of Podiatry Southwest Regional Branch. You can just follow it. We do post a lot of our events on there, go on there. And if they want to be added to our mailer, so we do send out a MailChimp mailer. I do it once a fortnight. So later on today, there will be an email going out where we do advertise our events, but we also advertise job positions, clinic sales, equipment sales, and everything else. So you can just email me at chair.swrbc. I have to think about those initials every time. Southwest Regional Branch Committee. So swrbc@rcpod.org.uk. Or just ping me a message and I can just add it.
I'll put that on the show notes. Okay. I'd like to thank you for your time very much. So,
You're very welcome.
Coming on. Thank you for putting on the webinar in the first place. It made us all think about where we're going, or where we are, should I say, and coming on here about talking about where we think that we should be going as a profession. I would encourage all those podiatrists that are both in the NHS and private sector to get on board with your webinars. On a personal note, thank you for giving up your time freely, not only for this, but for everything else that you do for the profession. So thank you for your time, Erica.
You're very welcome, Damian.